Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to do something a little different than my usual content. Last week I taught myself how to sew. I started creating surgical masks to donate, and as I was doing that I couldn't find a tutorial on the We Can Sew It mask, which is the pattern I'm using to create these. I decided to create one myself, and I hope if you are interested in learning how to create it or if you just want to check it out, I hope this is helpful. So let's jump right in. First, you're going to cut 2 pieces of fabric, and both should measure out to be 9 by 8 inches. This is a little bit larger than what the actual instructions say. I just found this easier when I was doing my measuring and cutting, so I just stuck with it. So now you're going to take one piece of the fabric, the exterior of the fabric, you're going to face the good side down, and then you are going to create a 1/4 inch seam along the bottom and just fold that inward. And then you are going to sew that 1/4 inch seam. Now, this is going to be the bottom of the exterior of your mask. So this is the part of the mask that people are going to actually see. And remember, when you are stitching any seam, you do want to do a back stitch at the beginning and the end of the seam, which is what I was doing when I was pressing that button. That just helps keep that seam secure. So I'm going to quickly do it on the other side. Something I haven't mentioned yet is ironing. I started ironing after the first few masks I created, and they started coming out so much better. You're able to iron just fabric in general, so it's nice and smooth before you start. And you can also iron as you create the seams and the pleats, and it just holds them much better as you sew. So I highly recommend that. I just use my regular iron that I have at home. I know some videos have this cute tiny iron, but I didn't want to spend $100 on a tiny iron when I have one. And there is your finished product. Now remember, you're going to do this with both sides. So now once you're comfortable, I highly recommend creating an assembly line and doing all of the first step with a bunch of them. It makes it so much easier to just knock out each step for 5 or 6 at a time. All right, step 2. Now you are going to create the pleats. So you are going to do this with both pieces of fabric, and you do the pleats on the good side of the fabric. So here I am folding them. If you need to, you can use the pattern that is found online as a nice guide. I did it with the first couple, but once you get the hang of it, you can kind of eyeball it and tell what looks good. I highly recommend using an iron for the pleats. It helps it so much more to keep them nice and pressed. And then this is something that's not necessarily required, but I prefer to do it since the pleats get a little wonky, is when it comes to creating this seam to sew in the sides, is I actually iron the seam as well. It just makes it so much easier to actually go under the sewing machine and to keep those pleats in check when we go to sew it. So you are going to do this with each side of the mask, and when you do it, you want it to be on the good side for both, because then you're going to sandwich them together when creating the mask, which we'll go over in the next step. One thing I recommend is when you actually put this in the sewing machine is to try to keep going along with the pleats. You'll see it again in a second when I actually put it into the sewing machine, but that's one of the things I found. And if you choose to try to use flannel instead of 100% cotton, which flannel is a type of cotton, it's just a little bit bulkier, I found that the pleats were much harder to go under the sewing machine and actually get a nice straight stitch with it. So something to keep in mind. Still possible, it's just not the prettiest stitch, but then again, I'm also new to all of this, so who knows. Okay, step 3. Now we are going to sew each side individually, and this is just to lock in those pleats. So if you see, I have the seam sewed in there, and this is again just like that bottom, you're creating a 1/4 inch seam. And remember to backstitch, always backstitch. I'm doing it now, you can't see my hand in the frame. So the next step, you are going to combine both pieces of fabric and create a top stitch. This will actually get your 2 pieces together now, and you are going to sew a 1/4 inch seam along the top. Now, pay attention when you're doing this. You want the good sides facing together. After you sew them, you're going to flip it over and finish your mask. Again, don't forget to backstitch. And try to get a nice straight line if you can here, because this is one that would be noticeable just because it's going to be the top of your mask. And something I found another time to iron is ironing this seam. Just it gives you a nice even fold after you take it out and close it. So there you have it. Now you have them connected and you're almost there. Okay, so this next step is considered optional, but I have been doing it for my mask. You're going to sew in the pocket for the nose wire. This keeps it as a removable option, so for those that don't want them, or if you're taking it out to wash, on one of the sides you're going to sew in an L shape, and on the other side you're going to leave a space at the bottom, and then you're going to sew in just a little line. The stitching's hard to see right here. I'm sorry. It's, white thread on a pattern, but there is a little bit of a gap there. And what that allows you to do is on the inside of the mask, through the bottom, you can slip in your finger and put in a little wire, or what I've been using is the pipe cleaner. The instructions online do actually have the image of the shape, so it's easier to see along with the measurements. All right, our next step is to make the ties. You have the option to either create your own ties or purchase bias tape. If you do purchase bias tape, you want double fold extra wide bias tape. Here I have measured out 2 pieces of fabric that is 36 inches long each and around 2 inches wide. You can go a little lower. This I've just liked because it gives me a little more room for error. So I'm folding both ends in half into the center. I'm ironing it down, and then I'm going to fold that in half again. It creates a nice clean line, and then you will actually put the mask in the center and stitch right over. The next step, what I do, this isn't necessary, I just kind of like it and it's made it easier for me, is after I iron the entire strip, I will measure the ends. You want 16 inches off each end, and then the mask goes right in the center. I like to measure it and then put a pin in it. So when I sit down at the sewing machine to sew, I slide the mask right in and start sewing and then remove those pins. All right, now it's time to attach the ties to the mask. You're going to sew both the ties on the sides of the mask. So first you're going to make sure you have your mask facing the right way. So the good sides are now facing outward. And here I am just opening that little part of the tie, which is kind of like a pocket now. And I try my best to line it up and make sure it's nice and snug. I find that when you're using all cotton, the mask is nice and thin, so it's much easier. The ones that I did with flannel were a little bit bulkier, so that tie wants to slide off a bit when it comes down to sewing. So remember to backstitch. And take your time with this one just to make sure you get a nice clean line and that the tie is staying in place, since you do have those pleats and that bulkiness on the edge. It might want to slide off a little. Sorry, I'm blocking the view. And then what I am doing here when I'm turning it is I'm actually creating a little box on each corner of the mask where the mask and the tie are meeting at each end. And I sew back up, so you'll actually have 2 lines of stitching on the mask. I've done it with only one on some, and I just do the little box on each end. It's really a preference. I don't know. There's no guides of how many times you have to. This is just what I was doing. And here you can see I'm kind of doing that second tie and sliding it into the tie. Straightening it out. If you need to, you can clip this before you put it into to keep it in place. Early on, I was pinning it each time. I have a few clips that I use now sometimes if I want to keep it in place, or if I'm working quickly to make sure I don't bump anything. But again, that's all preference and what you like to use and really what tools you have on hand right now, because it's not like we can go out and buy anything right away. Or if you can't, you shouldn't. Stay at home. Stay at home. So you can choose how you want to sew the ties. I have just found that I enjoy attaching the ties to the mask first and trying to clean up all of those lines and really secure it there before I sew the ends that will actually be tied behind someone. And I have found that making the little box to secure each corner, and in a second I'll lift up a little so you can kind of see that view a little bit better. Here I am going back up and back stitching. The first few I did a little bit too far away from the edge, and I noticed that my tie would kind of roll up on the edge. I don't think that's a deal breaker, but it didn't look as good as some of the new ones I've made. So here I am just back stitching to create that little box in the corner. I think these ones sit on the face much better and they feel much more secure. So there you go. There's stitching there. Okay, so now I'm going to finish up stitching the rest of the ties that aren't actually attached to the mask. I try my best to take my time here to get a nice clean line. Although if you looked at all of the masks I've created, that's definitely not the case. After I stitch there, I take the end of each tie and I roll it up once or twice just to tuck away any loose edges and make sure you have no loose threads. And after it's rolled up, I just sew it a couple of times to give it a nice clean end. All right, guys, and that is how you create the We Can Sew It surgical mask. And here is what the finished version looks like. So you have your ties, you have your pocket up top for a nose wire, which I personally love, and then you still have the filter pocket at the bottom so you can add or replace a filter if you want to use one. I hope everyone found this really useful. I hope this was helpful for anyone that is learning to sew or specifically learning to sew these masks so they can either use them for your friends and family or to donate. If you did like this video or found it useful, please give it a thumbs up. I greatly appreciate it, and feel free to subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. I love hearing from everyone and figuring out what you guys thought about this. Thank you so much for watching it. Have a great day. Bye.